with the member for Churchill. Madam Speaker, like the 92,000 citizens who signed a petition on the Parliament of Canada website asking the Liberal government to respect its promise of electoral reform, I'm profoundly disappointed and hurt by this about-face by the Liberals. The Prime Minister had made a commitment to changing this obsolete voting system to improve our democracy. He reiterated that promise 1,800 times, Madam Speaker, including in his throne speech, 1,800 times. The Liberals have completely done an about-face. Canadians get the impression they've been duped, and with good reason. Many of my constituents told me about their disappointment, and they have a question for the Prime Minister. As he said so many times, each vote should count. To explain this broken promise, the two institutions said there would be no consensus, and the Liberals continue to use that excuse without being able to define what a consensus is. My colleague from Sherbrooke attempted to ask a member to define consensus. What are the criteria to the Liberals? They still can't say to this day. Neither the Special Committee on Electoral Reform nor the citizens' groups were able to define what that consensus was that was needed in order to go ahead with electoral reform. But yet, given the consultations that took place by the Special Committee, and in my writing, I'll give you the figures, I'm rather surprised by this, because 78% of the constituents in Salaberry-Suroit who took part in my survey said that the number of seats of a party should reflect the number of votes obtained. If that's not consensus, 78%, I don't know what is. What number would be required for the Liberals to understand that people largely agree with going ahead with electoral reform?
70% also wanted there to be a collaborative work in Parliament with the support of all parties. This is a system with a certain level of proportionality, and were that to be the case, the government would have been a minority, and they would have had to work with other parties to enact its policies. And therefore, the current system has many shortfalls, many shortcomings. There are many voters that are not represented. In the 2015 election, over 9 million votes were not represented. The second issue is the distortion between results and the vote itself. At the last elections, the Liberal Party garnered 39% of votes and got 55% of seats and 100% of power. This is a distortion from our out-of-date election system. If that's not the case, I wonder what the Liberals call it. It allows the Liberals to follow their every whim and to block initiatives from other parties when it is not an advantage to their party. To the contrary, Canadians, 63% of Canadians voted for a party that wants to reform the current voting system. The revision is not as divided as the government claims. There is a consensus. 90% of experts and 80% of members of the public that participated with the Committee on Electoral Reform asked the government to adopt an electoral system with a certain element of proportionality. And so experts and Canadians throughout Canada agree and therefore have reached a consensus asking for all votes to be counted. This was repeated again and again, and the Conservatives recognised it, the Bloc Québécois recognised it, the Green Party recognised it also. There are some Liberal MPs who are part of this committee, and I'm sure that they are not in ignorance of these statistics, and so how can they say that there is no consensus? It's truly frustrating, Madam Speaker. Would the results have been different with a proportional system? Indeed, Canada's political scene would have been completely different if a proportional system were to be in place. The Bloc Québécois would be officially recognised in the House. The Green Party would multiply its number of MPs by 11. Madam Speaker, Canada is a proud country, proud because of its diversity, but this diversity is not represented in the House of Commons. The Liberals and Conservative governments do not want to change the system because the system is a benefit to them. The government has reneged on its promise, which will strengthen cynicism and defiance, especially amongst under 30s. Even if the 2015 election had an increased participation of the millennial generation is still the lowest voting one. They had a lot of hope riding on changing our voting system. They described politicians as individualists, cynics, and always in wait of the next election. These young people believed that their point of view was not taken into account by parties because the parties only served their personal interests. To understand the lack of confidence in the government, this is what my colleague from Mississauga Streetville had to say when our party announced that the 2015 election would be the last using the first-past-the-post system. It was the announcement that the Liberal Party would listen to Canadians with progressive ideas and with true change, end of quote. Congratulations. They are not listening, they are not progressive, and they have not created this change, Madam Speaker. They have merely confirmed the cynicism that lies in a large number of young Canadians who are not duped by this. When people don't vote during the first elections for which they are eligible, research shows that they are very unlikely to ever vote. It is very hard to garner their enthusiasm in participating in Canadian democracy once they have completely detached themselves from the first capacity or opportunity to go vote. The Liberals have shattered hope in their own party. Young Liberals in Quebec said that electoral reform was essential. It's at the basis of our democracy. They reiterated their desire to change our voting system. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister said that he would be the Minister of Youth to listen to these young people. He did the contrary. He did not follow his promise. Even worse, he sent a young MP as a scapegoat, which is a great example of political responsibility. Renouncing the voting reform will increase, or rather decrease, the youth's trust in politics. I believed it could not go any further down, but the Liberals have truly outdone themselves. Liberals had 11% of seats with 18% of votes, and they said that the election system and the voting system was out of date. But now they have 55% of votes without receiving even half of votes. They are much less inclined to do so. And then we have mydemocracy.ca. It was the perfect opportunity to consult Canadians after the publication of the Electoral Reform Committee's report. However, they scuttled this opportunity by fielding empty and biased questions. Never did the government ask participants what voting system they wanted for their country. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that slightly cynical, Madam Speaker? Canadians did not answer because they wanted to know if they were pragmatic or not. They wanted to give their opinion on a major reform for a better representation in our election system. I would like to answer to what the Prime Minister had to say, saying that some extremist voices could be in Canada if there was a change in system. He's once again trying to scare us. Kathleen Northam said a Trump candidate would never be able to win a majority here, but with our obsolete first-past-the-post system, a candidate using hate as a program could indeed win with as little as 35% of the popular vote. By shattering a promise that was ceaselessly repeated, the government brought hope and then shattered hope. They raised the indignity and made everyone angry for those who wanted there to be change. the same is true for some of their members. There will therefore be even less trust. And I ask the people that sit on his youth commission, I asked the youth to ask him why he did this,